The cab pulled up to the glass lobby of Trent Maritime Engineering at 6:47 on a Friday evening. Garrett Landon stepped out with a duffel bag over one shoulder and 3 weeks of Frankfurt insomnia carved into his face. Inside, 200 people filled the annual client showcase. Champagne, handshakes. Cecilia Trent was mid-sentence with a federal port commissioner when her eyes caught movement beyond the glass. She stopped talking. She set her glass on the nearest table, and then she did something no one at Trent Maritime had ever seen her do. She ran. Through the lobby, past the front desk, through the revolving door, and grabbed him with both hands. He dropped his bag. Neither of them spoke. The lobby went silent. Before you hear what happened next, think about this. Have you ever realized how much someone meant to you only after they were gone? And when did you know? Was it sudden, or had it been building all along? 3 months before that evening, Garrett Landon was invisible. He held the title of Facilities Maintenance Director at Trent Maritime, which sounded better than what Raymond Kelleher called him, the Handyman. His days moved through a rhythm so quiet that most people in the building had never heard his voice. Check the parking columns for settling cracks. Replace corroded valves. Recalibrate the humidity sensors. He carried a canvas tool bag and a pocket notebook full of measurements in handwriting so precise it looked machine-printed, and he moved through the hallways the way utility lines run through walls, always present, never noticed. Cecilia Trent first saw him on a Thursday afternoon in the basement parking garage. She had taken the service elevator to avoid a board member she did not want to have lunch with, and she found Garrett crouched at the base of a load-bearing column, pressing a crack gauge against a hairline fracture. His notebook lay open beside him, and the page showed a cross-section diagram of the column with stress distribution arrows drawn freehand. She stopped. A maintenance worker did not draw stress distribution diagrams. "How long has that been there?" she asked. He looked up. Mid-40s, calm eyes, grease on his left forearm. "About 8 months. Thermal, not structural. The rebar is sound, but the waterproofing membrane failed last spring. Another winter of freeze-thaw, and you will want to inject epoxy before it migrates." Cecilia had an engineering degree from Johns Hopkins. She knew that answer was more precise than anything her design team had said about this building in 3 years. Before she could respond, Raymond Kelleher appeared at the top of the parking ramp. 52, VP of Operations, 2 decades at the company, and a permanent grievance that Cecilia's father had handed the CEO chair to his daughter instead of to him. He wore his resentment the way some men wear cologne, faint enough to deny, strong enough that everyone noticed. "Landon," Raymond said, not looking at him. "Third-floor sink is backed up again. Handle it before the afternoon meetings." Garrett closed his notebook, nodded once, and walked past both of them toward the service elevator without a word. The doors closed behind him with a soft chime. Cecilia watched the indicator climb from B to 3. She was not thinking about anything personal. She was thinking about how a man who drew structural diagrams better than her senior engineers was carrying a pipe wrench to fix a sink. That evening, Garrett picked up Oliver from the elementary school on Chesapeake Avenue. The boy was 8, sandy-haired, quiet in the way children become when they have learned that one parent is all there is. They walked along the city dock, past the tourist boats and the oyster stands, and Oliver talked about his science project on buoyancy. "You know why that sailboat sits so low?" Garrett said, pointing at a ketch tied to the nearest slip. "Heavy keel? Lead. Keel. 1,700 pounds of lead at the bottom, so it can carry all that sail up top without tipping." He put his hand on Oliver's shoulder. "Everything that keeps something standing is underneath where you cannot see it." Oliver considered this with the serious expression of a boy who took his father's words literally and stored them somewhere safe for later. From the 4th-floor window of Trent Maritime, Nate Vickers watched them disappear down the dock. He pressed his knuckles against the glass until they widened. Nate was 45, a senior project manager, and the only person in the building who knew the truth. He had known Garrett Landon for 12 years, long before the canvas tool bag, long before Annapolis, long before the name on the maintenance badge meant anything less than the name on international bridge contracts. Every day he kept the secret felt heavier, and every day he kept it anyway because he had promised. 2 weeks later, the Chesapeake project almost collapsed. Trent Maritime had been contracted to design the expansion of a deep-water port terminal on the Chesapeake Bay. The largest project in company history, a $42 million federal partnership with a deadline that the Army Corps of Engineers had made clear was not flexible. The engineering team discovered a critical structural flaw in the breakwater design during a late-night review session. The wave load calculations did not account for the revised seabed profile from the most recent geological survey. The original design assumed a clay substrate at 14 meters. The new survey showed sand and gravel starting at 11. If built as designed, the breakwater would underperform within 3 storm seasons and fail within 10 days to the federal deadline. No viable alternative on the table. The lead engineer had circled the same numbers for 48 hours without finding a path forward. Garrett heard the argument through the engineering room door while replacing a faulty lock cylinder in the hallway. Voices rising. Someone saying the words, "catastrophic liability," someone else slamming a binder on the table. He finished the lock, collected his tools, and went home to put Oliver to bed. He read 3 chapters of a book about a boy who sailed around the world alone, waited until Oliver's breathing slowed, and then drove back to the office. At 11:14 that night, the security camera on the 3rd floor recorded Garrett entering the engineering room with his own key. He stayed for 2 hours and 19 minutes. When he left, a single sheet of drafting paper sat on Nate Vickers' desk, a complete redesign of the breakwater cross-section, hand-drawn in the meticulous style of someone who had learned drafting before computers made it optional. The revised structure used a stepped revetment approach that redistributed wave energy across 3 impact planes instead of 1, with each step calibrated to the new substrate depth. It was elegant. It was also beyond the capability of anyone currently employed at Trent Maritime. Nate found it the next morning. He recognized the drafting style before he finished unrolling the paper. He had seen those exact line weights, those precise dimension notations, those characteristic cross-hatching patterns on bridge blueprints in Stuttgart, on harbor schematics in Victoria, on the cover of a graduate textbook he still kept on his shelf. He gave the drawing to the engineering team without naming the source. The team adopted the solution within 48 hours. Nobody asked where it came from. They were too relieved to question it. Cecilia was not the type to accept solutions without explanation. She traced the timeline. The engineering room had been locked at 9 in the evening. The solution appeared overnight. The security footage showed only one unauthorized entry, a man in a canvas jacket, carrying nothing but a mechanical pencil and a roll of drafting paper from the supply closet. She found Garrett in the parking garage at the end of his shift, loading tools into his truck. "You drew the breakwater solution." He did not deny it. He leaned against the tailgate and wiped his hands with a shop rag while a tugboat horn sounded somewhere on the harbor. "I looked up your name," she said. "Garrett Landon. Landon Harwick Group. You designed the Rheinbrück Bridge outside Frankfurt, the Victoria Harbor expansion, the Kuala Lumpur port reinforcement. Your work is in 3 university textbooks that I studied at Hopkins. That was a different life. You are the most qualified structural engineer in this building, and you are unclogging drains." He folded the rag into a precise square and set it on the tailgate. "I am Oliver's father. That is the qualification that matters to me now." He asked her to keep it quiet. No announcements, no reassignment. She agreed, not because she owed him anything, but because the way he said his son's name told her more than any explanation could. Something shifted behind her expression as she walked back toward the elevator. Not admiration for a famous name, recognition of a man who had weighed the entire world against one child and had chosen the child without hesitation, and who carried that choice every day in the form of a wrench and a canvas bag and a pocketful of silence. That night, Cecilia sat on her couch with her laptop open to a photograph from a Berlin Engineering Awards ceremony, 2017. Garrett in a tailored dark suit, standing next to a woman with auburn hair and a wide, unguarded smile. His wife. The award placard read Lifetime Achievement in Structural Innovation. He had been 36. The woman beside him had been dead within 2 years of that photograph. Cecilia closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a long time, thinking about what it meant to walk away from everything she was still fighting to build, and what kind of man could do it without once looking back. The call from Germany came on a Tuesday. The Federal Highway Research Institute, the BAST, had detected stress fractures in the main suspension span of the Rheinbrücke Bridge outside Frankfurt. The bridge carried 112,000 vehicles per day across the Rhine. The fractures were concentrated near the eastern anchor block, in a location that suggested potential progressive failure of the primary tension cable array. Vast safety protocol required the original design engineer to conduct an on-site forensic assessment before any decision could be made to restrict or close the bridge. Garrett Landon was the original design engineer. There was no one else who understood the load path architecture well enough to distinguish between cosmetic damage and catastrophic risk. He sat in the maintenance break room with his phone pressed to his ear for 11 minutes. The BAST representative was polite, formal, and unmistakably clear. This was classified as a critical infrastructure safety matter. If the bridge failed, and Garrett had declined the assessment, the liability chain would reach him regardless of his current employment. But liability was not what decided him. What decided him was the representative's final sentence. The bridge carried 31,000 pedestrians per day, including a school walking route that crossed the eastern span every morning at 7:45. People could die. He could not say no. The problem was Oliver. Garrett had no family in Annapolis, no family anywhere nearby. His wife had been dead for 4 years. Her parents lived in an assisted care facility in Tucson. His own parents were gone. The only person he trusted completely with his son was Nate, and Nate's wife was visiting her sister in Portland that entire week. He told Nate in the maintenance workshop that afternoon. The fluorescent lights hummed above them. Nate leaned against the metal workbench and crossed his arms. "I will figure something out. Julia is back Friday. I can cover until then. That is only 3 days." BAS says 2 weeks minimum. Cecilia appeared in the doorway. She had been walking through the basement corridor, the shortcut she had started taking more frequently, without examining why, and had heard enough to understand the problem. "The company sponsors a youth sailing program at the Annapolis Yacht Club," she said, one hand resting on the doorframe. Her tone was the same she used for quarterly projections: precise, unemotional, practical. "Oliver can join the afternoon session on the days Nate cannot cover. I will coordinate pickup and scheduling with the program director." Garrett looked at her. A CEO offering to manage the after-school logistics of a maintenance worker's 8-year-old son. The offer was practical in form but personal in substance, and both of them knew it. "You do not have to do that." "I know." Silence. The fluorescent light above them flickered once and steadied. "All right," he said. "Thank you." Raymond walked past the maintenance workshop 3 minutes later. Through the half-open door, he saw Cecilia Trent standing in a basement hallway talking quietly with the handyman. Their posture was not romantic, but it was private, and that was enough to lodge in the part of Raymond's brain where suspicions took root. The next morning, before dawn, Garrett sat on the edge of Oliver's bed. The boy was half asleep, curled around a pillow, his model ship kit spread across the nightstand in labeled plastic bags. "I have to go fix something overseas. Couple of weeks. Uncle Nate will be here every day." Oliver opened one eye. "Will Miss Trent be there too?" Garrett stopped. His son had met Cecilia exactly once, a brief, unremarkable encounter when she walked through the maintenance level. Children do not ask about people who have not already become important in some invisible way. "She will help out," he said quietly. "Go back to sleep, buddy." He kissed Oliver's forehead and left while the harbor was still dark, and the only sound was the rigging of sailboats clinking against their masts in the wind before sunrise. Frankfurt was cold and bureaucratic. Garrett spent the first 4 days in a hard hat on a suspended inspection platform 60 meters above the Rhine, photographing crack patterns with a BAS team of 9 engineers and 2 federal safety officers. The wind at that height cut through every layer he wore. The fractures were real, visible to the naked eye, running in parallel lines along the cable anchor housing. But after 3 days of measurement and core sampling, the data told a story that had nothing to do with Garrett's original design. The stress concentrations did not match the fatigue profile of the specified high-tensile cable steel. The crystal structure under the electron microscope showed a different alloy entirely. Someone had substituted a cheaper commercial-grade steel during construction. The cable diameters were correct. The certification stamps looked authentic. The material inside was not what had been specified. Garrett knew exactly who had managed construction procurement for the Rheinbrücke project. Victor Harwick, his former partner. The man he had walked away from 5 years ago, what was supposed to be a 2-week inspection, became an open-ended forensic investigation. German federal prosecutors opened a criminal case. Bast subpoenaed Garrett as a material witness with direct knowledge of the original specifications. He could not leave Frankfurt until the preliminary hearing concluded. 2 weeks became 3. 3 became open-ended. Back in Annapolis, the week settled into a quiet pattern. Nate picked Oliver up from school on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Tuesdays and Thursdays, Oliver attended the yacht club sailing program, the youngest participant by 2 years, and the most focused by far. Cecilia checked in with Nate by phone twice a week. Brief calls, logistics only. How is he eating? Does he need anything for school? Is he sleeping through the night? On a Wednesday afternoon in the 3rd week, Cecilia stopped by Nate's house to drop off paperwork for a quarterly project review. Oliver was at the kitchen table with newspaper spread beneath him, gluing the bowsprit onto a scale model of the USS Constellation, the Civil War sloop of war that sat permanently docked at Baltimore's Inner Harbor. Cecilia had bought the model kit at the Maritime Museum the Saturday before. She had told no one. Oliver looked up from the glue bottle. "Dad says you are the only boss who actually listens." Cecilia pulled out the chair across from him. She picked up the instruction sheet, studied the rigging diagram, and helped him align the foremast into the deck slot. She did not respond to what he said. Some things are better honored by action than by acknowledgement. Nate stood in the kitchen doorway with a coffee mug that had gone cold 10 minutes earlier. He watched Cecilia hold the foremast steady while Oliver applied glue with the careful precision of a boy who had learned patience from a father who measured everything twice. Nate recognized what was forming between the woman and the boy, and through the boy, between the woman and the absent man, and he knew neither adult had a name for it yet. Raymond Kelleher noticed Garrett's absence in the 2nd week. By the 4th, he had assembled his case with the patience of a man who had been waiting for leverage for 3 years. No formal leave request on file. No PTO approval in the HR system. No medical or emergency leave documentation. By the letter of the Employee Handbook, Section 12, Paragraph 4, Garrett Landon had abandoned his position. Raymond brought the recommendation to the board in a closed session. Immediate termination for job abandonment, plus a formal review of the CEO's decision-making regarding the maintenance department. Cecilia blocked the motion. She cited a CEO prerogative clause for extraordinary leave and declined to elaborate further. Raymond did not push in the meeting. He did not need to. The question was already planted. The absence hit the building in ways nobody had predicted. Garrett had maintained the physical infrastructure of Trent Maritime the way a circulatory system maintains a body, preventively, silently, completely. Without him, the basement drainage pump failed during a coastal rainstorm and flooded the document archive with 4 inches of brackish water. The server room humidity sensors drifted out of calibration over 72 hours, triggering 2 false fire alarms that evacuated the building during client meetings. The electronic lock system on the engineering wing suffered a firmware glitch that Garrett had been manually patching for 18 months, and it locked out the entire 3rd-floor team for 4 hours on a Tuesday morning, with a federal deadline 6 days away. Each failure required an outside contractor. Each contractor took 2 days to arrive and charged 3 to 5 times what Garrett had never billed. The repair total in 4 weeks reached $87,000. Cecilia signed every invoice and thought the same thing each time. He was never just fixing things. He was holding the entire building together at a level no one saw until he stopped. Raymond leveraged the chaos. In a second board meeting, he presented the invoices in a neat stack and asked the question he had been refining. Why is the CEO personally shielding a maintenance worker who abandoned his post without notice? What exactly is the nature of this relationship? He did not say the word affair. He did not have to. The implication moved through the conference room like smoke. Cecilia held his gaze. Mr. Landon is on approved personal leave for a structural engineering consultation abroad. That is the full extent of it. Approved by whom? By me. And documented where? Silence. Raymond allowed himself a small smile. He had what he needed. Board members exchanged glances. The seed was set, and he intended to water it. That night, Cecilia stood alone in her corner office on the 7th floor. The harbor lights reflected off the dark water below. She could see the maintenance workshop window at the basement level dark for the first time in 3 years. She had walked down there that afternoon under the pretext of checking the drainage repair. Garrett's rolling chair was still pulled out from his workbench. His canvas jacket hung on the back, one sleeve draped over the armrest. His pocket notebook sat beside a mechanical pencil with the lead still extended. She picked up the notebook, flipped to the last entry. A sketch of the server room ventilation layout with 3 annotations in his handwriting. Check damper actuator. Replace filter 7. Ask Oliver about science fair display board. His son's name in the same list as equipment maintenance. That was who he was. Everything in one notebook. Everything held in the same careful hand. She put the notebook back exactly where she found it and went upstairs to stand at the window where she could no longer see the empty chair, but could still feel the weight of it. At 2 a.m. Frankfurt time, Garrett called Nate from his hotel room near the Hauptbahnhof. The streetcar tracks outside his window caught light from the station and threw it in slow-moving lines across the ceiling. "How is Oliver?" "Good. Built the entire lower hull today. Kid has got your hands." "Is he eating?" 3 plates of spaghetti last night." Nate paused. "He asked about you 7 times today. But he is fine, Garrett. He is solid." A longer pause. Then Nate said quietly, "Cecilia comes by every Wednesday. She does not have to. She just does." The silence on the line lasted 7 seconds. Garrett did not ask why. Nate did not explain. Both of them understood that the conversation had just said more in its quiet than either was prepared to say out loud. A streetcar passed outside. Its light swept across the ceiling and disappeared. "Take care of him," Garrett said. "I am," Nate said. "So is she." Raymond hired a private investigator in the 5th week. The report confirmed everything he had hoped for. Garrett Landon, facilities maintenance director, was Garrett Landon, co-founder of the Landon-Harwick Group, designer of 6 internationally recognized infrastructure projects, a recipient of the Berlin Prize for Structural Innovation, and the original holder of patents valued at over $90 million. Raymond's hands trembled as he read, not from shock, but from satisfaction. He would reveal this at the showcase in front of 200 guests, board members, and trade press. He would frame Garrett as an infiltrator who had compromised the CEO. Truth was not the point. Optics were. Nate sensed the ambush coming. He recognized the signals late-night printing in Raymond's office, a calendar invite to 2 board members labeled Integrity Concern Confidential. On a Tuesday evening, 5 days before the showcase, Nate asked Cecilia to meet him at a coffee shop on West Street. She sat across from him in a booth near the back. He broke his promise to Garrett. He told her everything. Not the identity, she already knew that. He told her the full why. The part Garrett had never shared with anyone except Nate and a federal agent. Victor Harwick had not merely committed procurement fraud. When Garrett discovered material substitutions across 3 active construction sites in 2019, Harwick responded with threat, a voicemail mentioning Oliver's school by name and address. A photograph of their Connecticut house slipped under Garrett's windshield. Garrett went to the FBI. The evidence was insufficient for charges. The case was closed. Garrett was left with a partner who had threatened his child and a system that could not protect them, so he protected them himself. Dissolved the partnership. Surrendered tens of millions in contracts and patents. Moved to Annapolis. Took a job no one in engineering would connect to his name, and built a life where his son could walk to school without Garrett wondering who was watching. Nate slid a folder across the table, financial records from a blind trust. Garrett had anonymously funded 3 of Trent Maritime's engineering scholarships for 4 years. He had donated the patent for the harbor sensor system that generated 14% of the company's licensing revenue. He had chosen Trent Maritime because Cecilia's father had been one of the few people in the industry who treated him with respect when he was young and unknown. Cecilia read the documents without speaking. Her coffee cooled untouched. When she turned the last page, she sat still for nearly a full minute. "Raymond is going to try to expose him at the showcase," she said. Nate nodded. "That is why I am telling you now. I am breaking a promise to save him from a man who wants to use his worst years as a weapon." Cecilia put the papers in her bag. She did not say thank you. She left cash on the table, walked out into the November evening, and sat in her car for 20 minutes before starting the engine. She was not preparing a rebuttal. She was recalibrating everything she understood about what it meant to give, without ever asking for anything in return. The showcase fell on the first Friday of November. The lobby of Trent Maritime gleamed under temporary lighting. Caterers in black moved between clusters of Port Authority officials, federal engineers, investment analysts, and industry partners. 200 guests circulated beneath project renderings and engineering schematics mounted on display boards. A jazz trio played near the atrium windows. Champagne moved on silver trays. The harbor beyond the glass walls was dark, except for the navigation lights of anchored vessels. Raymond had positioned himself as the presenter for the program segment titled Company Values and Forward Vision. He had volunteered 3 weeks earlier. No one questioned a VP wanting to deliver the inspirational portion of the evening. He waited until the room was full, until the champagne had softened the crowd, until every board member was seated and visible. He stepped to the microphone with a practiced expression and a presentation clicker in his right hand. Trent Maritime was built on transparency, he began, on trust, on knowing exactly who stands beside you. He clicked. A photograph of Garrett appeared on the projection screen, the employee badge photo from 2 years earlier. Canvas jacket, maintenance department ID. He clicked again. A photograph from the Berlin Prize ceremony. Garrett in a tailored suit at a podium. The placard reading Dr. Garrett Landon, co-founder, Landon Harwick Group. The room stirred. 200 faces turned toward the screen. This man has been working in our building for 3 years under a fabricated identity, Raymond said. A man who held $90 million in patents pretending to fix pipes and patch drywall. A man with undisclosed personal ties to our CEO. A man who left the country 5 weeks ago without filing a single day of leave, and whose absence has cost this company $87,000 in emergency repairs. He let the number land. He watched it ripple through the room. I am formally requesting that the board convene an emergency session to terminate Mr. Landon and review the CEO's judgment in this matter. Board members set down their glasses. The jazz trio had stopped playing. 200 people waited in a silence that felt like held breath. At that exact moment, 700 miles to the northeast, a Lufthansa flight from Frankfurt touched down at Baltimore-Washington International Airport. The German investigation had ended 2 days earlier when Victor Harwick was arrested in Hamburg on 12 counts of federal construction fraud and 2 counts of criminal endangerment. The prosecutors released Garrett from his subpoena with a handshake and an apology for the delay. He booked the first available seat home. He did not call ahead. Not Nate, not the office, no one. His phone had died somewhere over the Atlantic, and he had not searched for his charger. He just wanted to get home. He wanted to see his son. A taxi carried him south on Route 2 through the Maryland suburbs. He watched the dark trees pass and thought about nothing except the sound of Oliver's voice. Cecilia rose from her chair near the front of the lobby. She did not rush. She smoothed the front of her blazer with both hands, a gesture so controlled that only someone who knew her would recognize it as the motion she made before she dismantled something. She walked to the podium with the measured pace of a woman who had already decided every word she intended to say, and the exact order she would say them. Mr. Kelleher is correct about one thing, she said. Her voice was clear and carried no emotion that she had not chosen to put there. Garrett Landon is the co-founder of the Landon Harwick Group. The room recalibrated. This was not a denial. This was confirmation from the CEO herself. He designed the Rheinbrücke Bridge in Frankfurt, the Victoria Harbor Container Terminal, the Kuala Lumpur Deepwater Port Reinforcement. His structural designs are studied in graduate programs at MIT, Delft, and Johns Hopkins. He is, by any objective measure, one of the most accomplished structural engineers working today. She paused long enough for the weight to settle across the room. He is also the man who dissolved his own company, surrendered $90 million in intellectual property, and walked away from his entire career because his former business partner threatened the physical safety of his 8-year-old son. He moved to a town where nobody knew his name. He took a job that no one in his field would ever connect to his former life. He fixed our pipes and our locks and our drainage systems for 3 years without complaint. And while he was doing that, while Mr. Kelleher was calling him the Handyman, he was anonymously funding 3 of our engineering scholarships and donating the sensor patent that generated 14% of our licensing revenue last year. She turned to face Raymond directly. Her voice did not rise. You called him an infiltrator. But the only person in this room who accessed confidential employee records for personal leverage, who hired a private investigator to weaponize a colleague's history, who timed a public accusation to inflict maximum reputational damage to both a colleague and this company is you. She addressed the board without turning away from Raymond. Mr. Kelleher's employment is terminated effective immediately for violation of employee privacy protections, misuse of company resources, and conduct detrimental to the organization. Security will escort him from the premises. Raymond's mouth opened. No sound came out. His hand was still holding the clicker. 2 security officers appeared at the edges of the lobby. They had been briefed an hour before the event. The board chairman looked at the other directors. No one raised an objection. Raymond was escorted past the champagne table and through the service exit. The door closed behind him with a click that was quieter than anyone expected. Cecilia remained at the podium. Her posture was straight, her hands steady, her voice uncracked. She had defended a man who was not present to defend himself, and she had done it with evidence and precision and not a single wasted word. But her eyes had already moved past the board members, past the guests, past the champagne and the silent instruments, to the glass wall facing the street. A yellow cab was pulling up to the curb. She watched Garrett step out. Duffel bag over one shoulder, jacket wrinkled from 14 hours in economy, hair pushed in 3 directions by cabin air. He stood on the sidewalk and looked at the building he had held together with his own hands for 3 years. Lit up from inside and full of people and noise, he looked like a man who was not sure he was still allowed to walk through the door. Cecilia set the microphone on the podium. She did not hand it to anyone. She did not excuse herself or explain where she was going. She stepped off the riser and walked toward the lobby entrance. Then she was not walking, she was running. Past the front desk, past the security station, through the revolving door. Her heels struck the stone steps outside with sharp cracks that echoed off the glass facade. Garrett saw her coming and did not move. He could not understand why the CEO of Trent Maritime was sprinting toward him on a Friday evening in front of every important person in the Chesapeake maritime industry. She reached him and grabbed the front of his jacket with both hands. Not an embrace. A hold, the grip of someone who had spent 5 weeks learning exactly what absence costs and had decided, in front of 200 witnesses, that she would not allow it to happen again. His duffel bag slipped off his shoulder and hit the sidewalk. It tipped over and neither of them looked down. What happened? His voice was raw from 14 hours of recycled air and no sleep. Her face pressed against his shoulder. You do not get to be invisible anymore. He stood still for a moment. Then his hands came up slowly, not with understanding, but with something older than understanding, something the body knows before the mind finds words for it. His arms closed around her back, and he held her the way you hold something you did not realize you had been reaching for. Behind them, Nate's sedan pulled into the parking lot. The passenger door opened before the car fully stopped, and Oliver jumped out, backpack bouncing on one shoulder. Nate had been tracking the flight all afternoon, and had picked Oliver up from school on a hunch about the timing. Oliver ran across the asphalt and threw both arms around his father's leg. Garrett crouched without fully letting go of Cecilia, one arm around Oliver, one hand still on her back. Oliver pressed his face into his father's chest. Garrett closed his eyes. For a long moment there was nothing else, no lobby full of people, no showcase, no 5 weeks of distance, no $90 million, no bridge over the Rhine, just a man holding his son with one arm, and the woman who had held everything together in his absence with the other. Inside the glass lobby, someone began to clap. A single pair of hands near the atrium window, then another near the bar, then more. The sound spread through the space the way light crosses water in the early morning, without hurry, without force, simply because it was time. Nate leaned against his car with his arms folded and watched. He did not clap. He did not need to. He had been carrying this story for 5 years and had just watched it reach the ending it deserved. 6 weeks later, Garrett sat at a new desk on the 3rd floor of Trent Maritime. The nameplate read Consulting Structural Engineer Part-Time. 3 days per week, no management title, no board seat, home by 3:30 to meet Oliver's bus. The board offered him a vice presidency. He declined in 11 words. I appreciate it, I am going to keep the schedule I proposed." Cecilia did not argue. She understood that his departure from the industry had never been surrender. It had been a statement of priority, and no title would rearrange that order. There was no announcement between them. The change came the way tides shift so gradually you cannot name the moment, and then so obviously you wonder how you missed it. Cecilia began appearing in the third-floor workshop on Friday afternoons. She would sit on the corner of the drafting table with a paper cup of drip coffee, not the espresso from her office. The same coffee everyone else drank, and they would review drawings together. Some Fridays they argued about load distribution until the harbor turned orange. Others they worked in a silence that neither needed to fill. She never stayed past 5. He never asked her to, but he started leaving a second cup of coffee on the drafting table Friday mornings before she arrived. In December, Oliver's school announced a holiday play. Garrett reserved seats in the front row. He wrote C. Trent on a strip of masking tape and pressed it to the back of the third chair from the left. When Cecilia arrived and saw her name in his handwriting on a piece of tape on a folding chair in an elementary school auditorium, she looked at him. He was watching Oliver adjust a paper crown behind the curtain and did not notice her face. She sat down without a word. During the performance, Oliver delivered his one line, something about a star, and looked directly at the two of them sitting together in the front row. He smiled. On a Saturday in mid-December, Oliver finished the USS Constellation model. 7 weeks of wood glue and patience. He carried it to the office on Monday with both hands cupped around the hull, and placed it on the corner of Garrett's desk, next to the framed photograph of his mother. "I am putting it here," Oliver said, "so you remember the way back to the harbor." Garrett looked at his son. He did not speak. He put his hand on the back of Oliver's head and held it there, and the boy leaned into his father's side the way a boat settles against a dock when the current finally eases. On a late afternoon a few days before Christmas, the sky over Annapolis turned the color of old copper. Garrett and Cecilia stood at the end of the city dock, watching a container ship move through the Chesapeake toward the open Atlantic. They were not touching. They stood close enough that the wind occasionally pressed her sleeve against his arm. They had both spent their adult lives building systems of control. He controlled his world by disappearing, by becoming no one, by making himself small enough that no threat could reach what mattered. She controlled hers by never running toward anything, by keeping every emotion behind glass, measured and catalogued and never permitted to spill. But on a sidewalk outside a lit-up lobby, in front of every person who mattered in their professional world, both systems had failed at exactly the same time. And standing here now, watching the ship's wake rock the sailboats in their slips, neither of them wanted to rebuild the walls. The ship sounded its horn once as it cleared the bay marker. Behind them, somewhere on the wooden dock, Oliver was teaching Nate's daughter how to tie a bowline knot, narrating each step the way his father explained engineering patiently, precisely, with the quiet confidence of someone who trusted the rope to hold. Neither of them had been looking. "Now here are 2 questions for you." When Cecilia ran through that lobby and grabbed Garrett in front of everyone, was that the moment she fell, or the moment she finally stopped pretending she had not already? And Garrett's choice to stay invisible for 4 years, was that strength, or was it the one thing he got wrong?